Alhamdulillah. I prefer personally if people don't stand, so I just like people not to stand if I come in the room. Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, definitely I think it's a good thing. I'm sure he doesn't like it, but in spite of that. There's a story of one of the ulama in Andalusia. He came in and everybody stood up. And he said, you were prohibited from doing that. And one of the ulama that was there, he's famous Andalusian alim. He said, no, we're not prohibited. The prohibition is that you want us to do that. So it's actually in your heart is where the prohibition lies. The Prophet ﷺ, he liked very simple, no protocol. His gatherings were very simple gatherings. They couldn't tell who he was between his Sahaba. He would not have had this type environment. Because if you come in, if somebody came in now, they would know immediately who was teaching, But in his majlis, he sat at the same level they sat at, and he spoke in the circle. And so when people came in that didn't know him, they couldn't recognize him from amongst the other Sahaba, which is an amazing testimony to his humility. He said, "Umirtu an atawada'a hatta la yafkhara ahadun ala ahad." I was commanded to be humble, so that no one would show contempt for anyone else. Nobody would feel better than anybody else. Because if he was commanded to be humble, then where does that put everybody else? So he said, I was commanded to be humble. And tawadu', wada'a means to put something down, like wada'tuhu ala al-ard. I put it, like if I say wada'tuhu. The word wada' also means to give birth, because the child falls. In fact, they call it masqat ra's, because in most pre-modern societies, women did not give birth on their backs. They gave birth squatting. And so when the child came, the head hit the earth. And so literally the Arabs call where you were born the place your head hit, masqat ra'sihi. Because that's how, and they still do that in some cultures. The women actually squat. They don't go on the back, because it's easier to do the pushing than it is when you're on your back with the epidurum and all that other stuff. So the Prophet ﷺ, that's what he said. He was commanded to be humble. And then one of the things that Imam al-Ghazali says about humility, he says that أول التواضع التكلف. The beginning of humility is to force yourself. Because we're very egocentric humans. Our lives revolve around ourselves. It's a major problem. In fact, it's probably the single most significant problem on the planet is egocentricity. The nafs, nafsi. And one of the things that this religion teaches people is ithar, to actually begin to prefer other people. And the reason for that is because Yawm al-Qiyamah, it's all nafsi. And the only people that are saved are the people that had the ithar in this world. Allah gives them the ithar in the next world. And it's very difficult to get out of egocentricity. Just that you are the sun and everything else in the world is revolving around you. That's the child's reality, which is why children, when they don't get something, they scream. Because to them, that's the only thing that matters at that moment, is their nafs. And really, this is very related to the talk, because in our tradition, the place of the science of Tasawwuf is really rooted in overcoming the self. Gharabatun nafs. That's the root of the science. And it's a Quranic science, because the Quran clearly delineates the different types of nafs. Nafs al-ammara, nafs al-lawwama, nafs al-mutma'inna. These are Quranic terms. Nafs al-ammara is the egocentric, commanding self. It's the soul that it commands and impels one to things that are not good for it. Which is why people constantly do things that are bad for them. They smoke even though they know smoking's bad. They don't exercise even though they know exercise is good because the nafs is lazy. They don't eat right because they eat things that the nafs inclines toward. So if they're given a choice for dessert between the cheesecake and the fruit, they choose the cheesecake. Because that's what the nafs inclines towards. It's the nature of the nafs, is it likes things that are maladdat, the things of ladda, the things that there's some type of delight in it. But what's interesting is the things that are beneficial for the self are often bitter. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ said that, he said, حُفَّتَ الْجَنَّةُ بِالْمَكَارِهِ. Paradise was surrounded by distasteful things. وَحُفَّتَ النَّارِ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ. And hell was surrounded by delightful things. Things that we incline towards. And this is one of the paradoxes of the world. It's a paradox. And one of the other interesting aspects of the world is those things that are very difficult for you in the world, they're things that you get the greatest satisfaction when you do them. The real challenges in life, it's not going the easy route. It's going the harder route where you get that personal satisfaction that you've accomplished something. And we were talking yesterday, I was with somebody in Jeddah, or the day before, and they did a program. He's a producer, he does a religious program. And they did a program on happiness. He was talking about what makes people happy. And he asked me about that concept, sa'ada. And I told him, that in the Islamic tradition, happiness is not a state. It's not something you can be in. Like, you can't be happy. You can feel happy, but you can't be happy at any point in your life. That happiness is the sum total of your life. It's the result of your life. Whether you lived a happy life or whether you lived a miserable life. And that's based on what you did in your life. According to the Greeks, it was about virtue, living what they called arete, which was a life of excellence. The word they use for it means the same as ihsan. Raghib al-Isfahani and Imam al-Ghazali said that happiness is, and Imam al-Ghazali is heavily influenced by Raghib, so it's probably better to say Raghib al-Isfahani. Raghib al-Isfahani, who was a great ethicist, he was a mufassir, he was many things. He was one of these great ulama of Islam. But he said that the whole purpose of life is happiness. There's no other purpose. The purpose of life is sa'ada. And sa'ada, happiness, unlike anything else in life, is an end, not a means. Everything else is a means. If you ask people what they want, average people that haven't thought about things deeply, if you just say, what do you want out of life? Well, I want to have a family. I want to be successful. I want to get a degree. I want to make lots of money. Whatever. They give you lots of different reasons. But if you ask people, and then you begin to probe that, why do you want money? Well, it enables me to be free. I can do things that you can't do without money. Why do you want to be able to do things? And if you keep probing, the end result is always happiness. Because they want to be happy. They want to be in a state of contentment. So that is the essence of what humans are out for. But most people don't know it. And then they don't understand the difference between real and apparent goods. Like people think that fame is a good in itself. So there's all these people that want to be famous. They want to be known. Or they think that stature is a thing that it's good to have. Or they think money. I want money because money gives me power. Money gives me... And so they'll sacrifice real goods for what they deem to be the ultimate goods in life. And that's why people sacrifice their families. Families break up over inheritance. Because money to them is more important than the family. But the real good is the family, because you can have all the money you want, but if you don't have family, you're deprived of one of the most essential goods in life. which is that support system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave humans. I mean, family is at the root of what life is about. And many, many other examples of that. So this is one of the real problems with humans, is that they don't know what they want. And what they think they want, if you probe them, they want it for the same reason that other people want other things. It's really amazing if you think about it. People want different things, but if you really probe them, it's because they want the same thing, which is sa'ada. And then what revelation does is it turns it on its head, that there's no sa'ada in the dunya. You can't get it, because no matter what you have, you can lose it. And that's that state of just knowing that if you're in good health right now, you can drop dead. You know, we were just on a 10-hour flight. You can get a DVT, right? You know, you get venous stasis, you're sitting in this ridiculous tube, you know, with this noise level that's unbelievable. Shh. I mean, I'm still hearing it, you know. It's just, I'm like on a permanent 30,000 feet above state because I've been flying so much lately. So you just hear that kind of shh in the background. But you have that deep vein thrombosis. People die, like Olympic athlete died on an airplane, just in perfect condition of health. But he got this problem. If you don't drink enough, you don't walk during the flight. But even if you do that, you can still get the problem. You know, you take the precautions. But Imam Ali radiallahu anhu in a tradition said, and this is called marfu', even though it has hukm al-rafa'. In the hadith science, whenever there's an end of time statement, even if the Sahaba doesn't mention the Prophet, you have to assume it's from the Prophet, because they don't have revelation and they would only say something they heard the Prophet say. So sometimes Sahaba will just make a statement and it's actually from the Prophet. Imam Ali said one of the signs of the end of time is hemorrhoids become widespread and sudden death. Now, if you look at hemorrhoids and sudden death, the thing they have in common is sitting. It's that lifestyle of not moving, which is how heart disease, that's how heart disease, people get heart disease from sedentary lifestyle. So really what he was saying was one of the signs of the end of time is sedentary lifestyle. But he was looking at the effects of sedentary lifestyle, because that's more important. Had he said one of the signs of the end of time is people are going to sit around all the time and they won't move anymore. Okay, what's wrong with that? But what he said was they're going to get hemorrhoids, which is one of the worst conditions to have just as a condition, because it's so uncomfortable. People can't even sit down. And the most comfortable thing from lying down is sitting down. You know, it's when people stand, they say, let's go sit down. Why? Because it's more comfortable, right? They want to be comfortable. But if you have hemorrhoids, you'd rather be standing. So that's a sign of the end of time. And then sudden death, like DVTs, heart attacks, all these type things. People start. So you can be, one of the things that's very strange about our modern life is it's really the descriptions that we have of paradise from the pre-modern world, from the Prophet, from the Quran, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's very much like the way people live in the modern world. Like you walk into a room and all the lights turn on, because now they have these sensors. And I was in California, and I was with a Mauritanian, Sheikh Abdullah Wad Ahmedna, and we came, and the light turned on, and he said, who turned the light on? I said, it senses our movement, and it turns on so you can see the path. He said, subhanallah. He said, it's like Jannah. You know, they're making Jannah here. And then you go, and the cornucopia, you know, the Quran says, you have whatever you want. You go to the store, and there's 500 different types of coffee. I mean, it used to be when I was growing up, there was just coffee. You said, that's what you said. I'm not making this up. Some people are too young to remember these days. But people used to just say, can I have a cup of coffee? Because there was just Maxwell House, there was There was another one, Yerba, or I can't even remember, but Maxwell House, good to the last drop. That's what people drank, Maxwell House, and there was like 3 brands. And it was the same coffee. If you did a test and put blindfold people, they couldn't tell the difference. Now you have, mocha, cappuccino, supreme, ginger, super, X factor, Seriously, there's a whole list. When you wait in line, it takes an hour to get a coffee now because everybody comes up and they say, I'd like a no foam, extra hot, and 2% milk, right? So everybody is out there, like everything's becoming so specific to the nafs. Like every nafs has his own, it's not just coffee anymore where we all just go and have a cup of coffee. Every nafs has to get exactly what they want. It's really interesting time. One of the signs of the end of time, the Prophet said, تَخْتَرِفُ الْأَهْوَى. People's interests will become diversified. What they like to do. You go to the magazine rack, look at all those. There's people that read those things. There's stuff just on Harley Davidson motorcycles because there's people, that's their life. They're Harley Davidson. And they have clothes with Harley Davidson and shoes, and their pen says Harley Davidson, and their glasses say Harley Davidson. I'm not making this up. It's just amazing how all the nafs are turning into these individualized desire machines. So all the desires become individualized. How can people survive that? When I was a kid, you had 4 types of ice cream. Vanilla, strawberry, chocolate, and then tutti frutti. That was it. When you went to the ice cream, what did you want? And if you were really extravagant, you'd have like all 3 on a cone, like I'll have vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry together, and a dash of tutti frutti. That was like, whoa. That was somebody. But now you go in and there's like 400 types of all kinds of, now they have green tea ice cream. It's just Oreo cookie ice cream. Like everything's there. And so the people, their nafs are just completely being bombarded. Seriously, in Afghanistan, there's just a certain amount of dishes this is the way traditional cultures were. And one of the things the Sahaba were shocked at was when they went to Syria, there were a lot of plates with different types of food. It was like a big shock to them to see that. And they considered it like just extravagance, that food was fuel. Food is basically fuel. It's good, it tastes good, and Allah put blessings in food. But essentially food, if you really ask a physician, what is food for? It's just fuel. It's caloric fuel to give you the ability to do things in the world. And so this obsession with food and with all the different types of food and different tastes, that's all indications of the nafs is taking charge. And that's where people are at. A lot of people, we represent about 1% of the Earth's population, the people in this room, the way we're living. We're living much, much more extravagantly than kings lived 200 years ago. Really. Kings did not live the way we live. The type houses we live in. I was telling them this villa that we're in, I told Sheikh Abdullah, I said, subhanAllah, this would have been a palace 100 years ago in Saudi Arabia, like a king's palace. And the Hujjaj would look at it and just be in awe, because they were coming from huts. In India not in India there are palaces too, but in a lot of the places where Muslims come from, they're simple, poor places. So they would see this and the Indians would say, because they had the Taj Mahal, and I mean, they had real dunya. But that's really where things are going. It's just a diversification of nafs. The nafs is just diversifying, and more ways of fulfilling its individual desire. It used to be humans had pretty common collective desires. But now it's exactly like the Prophet ﷺ described. The end of time is that every nafs would be in its own specific types of desires. Music, if you look at music traditionally, every culture had a couple of types of music. There were just a couple types of music. You'd have high music, like in India you had a high classical music with the sitars, and they would do it based on the Vedas and all these very sophisticated. And then you had popular music of the common people. Same in Europe, classical music and folk music. Now it's just people, even in one genre of music, there's all these bifurcations and things that people get into and have words and terms, and there's a whole internal vocabulary that only that group speaks. So if you're into grunge, there's a whole vocabulary that goes with that. There's a dress code that goes with it. There's a way of being that goes with it. And that's one group. It didn't used to be like that. I mean, people were essentially, there was a homogeneity in culture that enabled us to be together as humans. So if you went to Rawalpindi, or if you went to Kabul or Herat or these places, there was a pretty much unified culture. It had class. There was class, because socioeconomic class determines things. But every class was pretty much harmonized, and there were similarities. They dressed the same. They had the same frames of reference. And so there was a homogeneity that enabled them to feel a esprit de corps, a type of what Ibn Khaldun called the asabiyya, the thing that holds things together. And that's one of the reasons why we're so fragmented now as people. We're becoming more and more fragmented. And people are withdrawing into their own autistic type of experience of life. So you have the iPod culture, which is very interesting. I mean, people walking around in a completely different reality than you're in, literally, because they're hearing songs or whatever they're hearing. I mean, people listen to different things. They might be, I saw a guy, he was walking, I was walking, he was walking, and he was saying, hablo, hablas. He was learning Spanish, on his iPod. So some people do useful things, but a lot of people, they're just bopping along, right? And the iPod commercial to me is really amazing because it's a shadow with these iPod earplugs. It's like the person's not even there anymore. It's just a shadow of a person. Whoever thought of that ad was just, I think, really brilliant, because they got to the essence of what that signifies. What you're doing is you're allowing somebody to put everything into you. Your thoughts are being dictated by somebody else, because what you're thinking about is what's being plugged into you, whether it's the song or whatever it is. And then there's no silence. People are losing the ability just to be silent, just to sit in silence. This is the human condition in the West particularly, but this is now it's a hegemonic culture. Somebody said to me, do the Muslims really want to take over the world? I said, no, they're reacting to our taking over the world. Right? I mean, that's what's going on. It's like this monolithic Western culture, everywhere it's going, it's changing cultures radically, and people are reacting to it. It's so disruptive. And then we kind of look at it like, we're not taking over the world. McDonald's, just because we're in Mecca now, just because everybody's eating McDonald's, wearing jeans, listening to the same type of music. We're not taking over the world. It's a cultural jihad. That's what it is. It's a cultural crusade. Because it's overwhelming all these cultures everywhere. Traditional crafts people can't compete. The shoes they used to make by hand, you can make it in a day, 1 million of them in some factory in Japan or somewhere. How do you compete with that? I mean, the Saudis used to have these, they called them Najdiya sandals. They don't wear them anymore. Only the real Bedouin type people wear them, because now they wear Birkenstock versions of them that are a lot more comfortable. They are. I have a pair. I used to wear the Najdiya, and then when Birkenstock came out with the same style, and it's all fit to your, and then your foot will, after a while, it's ergonomically designed to be perfect for your nuffs. It used to be just feet were feet. You put it in the shoe, but now it fits your foot. It's amazing. And how do people survive that without becoming just monsters, infant monsters? Because we get what we want. And then we get impatient when we don't get what we want. I mean, that's the current human condition. That's why everybody's out there in this state of stress and anxiety, and they're so used to getting what they want now. The computer's not fast enough. People come to Saudi Arabia, and I'm used to a DSL line. I'm sitting there waiting, and the thing's going like that. In California, you push the button, and it's instantaneous. But when we first started using the computer, they were slower than they are here. And it wasn't a problem then because we didn't have that expectation. So once you get the expectation of speed, it's hard to deal with the slowness. And that's what happens to the nafs. The more and more. And Sayyidina Umar said, "Ikhshawshinu, fa inna ni'mata la tadum." Be tough on yourselves because blessings don't last. Ikhshawshinu, fa inna ni'mata la tadum. It's an amazing statement by Sayyidina Umar. In other words, if you're always accustoming yourself to being in comfort, and when you find yourself outside of that comfort zone, suddenly you can't take it. And it becomes very difficult. So basically, the human condition is in crises. I mean, there's no doubt. It's always been in crises to some degree, because just being human is a crisis. Just the fact that we're here and living in the world, there's an aspect of it that has that crisis component. And people that work in ERs know that better than most people. There's always something about to happen, or something happening, or something just happened, always. I mean, that's the nature of life on earth. When the Prophet ﷺ came with this deen, one of the central components of the religion was to try to humanize people, to make the already difficult circumstances of the world more tolerable. And one of the central ways of doing that was to help people get outside of their egocentricity. Because not only is there a benefit for yourself when you're less egocentric, but it's making life a lot easier for other people. And so when the more people that do that, the better life becomes. That's what's so ironic about egocentricity. Egocentricity makes life miserable for everybody. And when you begin to get out of yourself and actually start thinking about other people, if you get a critical mass of people doing that, then you really begin to create paradise on earth. It's not the double shot, triple cappuccino. It's like, tafaddal. Can I get you something? Can I help? That is what makes life much more enjoyable as an experience. It's not the satisfaction of the self. That's the illusion of happiness. Is that if I can just satisfy myself, I'm going to be happy. That's the illusion of happiness. The real happiness is actually in serving others.
That's where the real happiness. In fact, in philosophy, they actually call it the hedonistic principle, because it's a paradox. Why people feel good about, they just did a study on brain about people giving charity, and all the pleasure zones in the brain were fired off when people were giving charity. Because people feel good about helping other people. It's the way we're designed. But the nafs is there to prevent that. Nafs, shaitan, hawa, and dunya. The enemies of the human are there to prevent that. And that's why the beauty of the prophetic way is that the Prophet ﷺ, he said, I did not see any evil, but I warned you about it. And I did not see any good, but I guided you to it. That he's already given you all of the guidance. And then it becomes a matter of, are you going to follow it or not? Are you going to practice these things? And they're amazing principles. And one of the examples that I've used many times, and Shaykh Abdullah al-Qadi, you can ask him about this because he was there and witnessed this. The Prophet ﷺ said that none of you will enter paradise until you believe, and none of you will believe until you love one another. And then he said, can I tell you something that if you do it, love will begin to grow amongst you? And they said, yes, indeed, Ya Rasulullah. And he said, spread peace amongst you. Now, the primary meaning of that is actually give the greeting of peace. Afshu salam bainakum. But it obviously has just what it means, spread peace amongst you. But we were in Medina, and we used to go every morning the same door, and there was a man there, very grumpy man, one of these guards at the door. And the first day I said salam alaikum to him, and he looked at me, he's like, wa alaikum salam, it's just. And then the next morning we came, same man. And I was with Shaykh Abdullah, and I smiled, said salam alaikum, and he was like, wa alaikum salam, And then the next day I came, same man. This is a true story. And I said, salam alaikum. And he looked at me, and just a tiny smile broke. And then the next day I came, and I just, salam alaikum, sabah al khair. And I swear to God, Shaykh Abdullah al-Qadi was there. He came up and he hugged me. It takes work. We don't want to do that work to break down these, human icicles. And people have reasons why they are the way they are. And a lot of it is just they didn't get enough hugs when they were kids or whatever. I don't know. There's a lot of reasons for it, why people are in the state. The lack of trust that they have for other people. There's a lot of reasons. But that aspect of our deen is so ignored. This aspect of just adab and treating people with respect, with human dignity, it's so ignored. And then the Muslim Ummah wonders why nobody treats us with respect. We don't treat each other with respect. Why should anybody respect us? Why should God grant us that gift of being respected if we don't respect each other? If we don't have just basic ithar, tafaddal. And I'll just give you one more example of this. When I was in Medina, I was with a man driving, and somebody cut him off, and he started honking his horn, and I just said to him, I said that is it's such a horrible thing to hear in this city, all the honking that goes on. Mecca's the worst for that, for honking. And it's just people, and the amazing thing is they honk when it's meaningless. Like honking, there's a reason to honk. Honking, there's a reason why you have a horn in your car. Because it's like to stop something really dangerous from happening. Or, if somebody really does something, you honk and let them know that wasn't appropriate. I want a bumper sticker, don't shoot, I admit I'm a lousy driver, But people do things, they cut you off sometime by mistake. And people, whenever they get cut off, they never remember the times they've cut off people. by accident. There's always the assumption, what an idiot. So this man, I just told him, I said, you know, the maqam of driving is ithar. وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ. They prefer others to themselves. That's the maqam of driving. Because when people have that type of adab on the road, driving is much more safe, and it's actually a much more, it's already a difficult thing to drive. It's not, you know, it's an intense thing to do. You're traveling at high speeds, and it's very dangerous. It's already a difficult thing. But when people have courtesy on the road, it just makes it easier to handle all those difficulties. So I just told him that. He said, no, you don't understand. Here, everybody, it's nafsi, nafsi. And I said, well, don't be one of those people. You know, you need to change. I came back a year later, and the same person, he's actually the son of a sheikh in Medina, a really sweet man. And a year later, and he told me, and I'd completely forgotten about this, you know, just that incident. But he told me, you know, I had an amazing experience this year based on something you said last year. And I said, what? And he said, do you remember when I got angry with that person cut me off, and you said, you know, you should really prefer people driving. He said, well, I decided to do that, to practice that. And he said, I was amazed at what I saw. Like people, just how they responded to that. You know, so he experienced that, just of doing that. But you need to create critical masses. I mean, that's what the Prophet ﷺ, what's so amazing is that he was able, because he was such a powerful transformative agent himself, I mean, the most powerful. No human has ever accomplished what he did in the time that he was given. And then that early generation, nobody's done that with lasting effects. I mean, you know, Genghis Khan was short-lasted. What he did was quite stunning, but it was short-lived. It wasn't like the Muslim phenomenon. I mean, the Christians, it took them hundreds of years to achieve what they did. The Muslims achieved in 100 years what is still considered largely the Muslim world. It's still the Muslim world. It's one of the great human achievements. So the Prophet ﷺ came with these incredible principles to help people help themselves and to help navigate the world in a way that makes it much easier to bear, because it's already difficult. The world is difficult. It's a ibtila, liyabluwakum. You know, we created you to test you, to try you, and it's already an ibtila. And so trying to implement these things is really what the deen, it's at the essence of our deen, it's at the essence of our religion, and it's something that needs to be re-centralized in our religion. Sayyid Naqib al-Attas said that the crisis of this ummah is adab. That's what he said. And I really believe that. He said that adab is a loss of prioritization, because when you put yourself first, everything else is chaos. When you put yourself first, when you are your major concern, everything else is chaos. Now, that is not to negate alaykum anfusukum, take care of your souls. But taking care of the souls, in reality, is taking care of other souls. I mean, that's the reality of it, is that when you begin to get out of that egocentricity and move into a world that actually is taking other people into consideration, that is nurturing your own soul. That's how you work on yourself. And that's why patience, all these. So, inshallah, what I'm hoping to do is go through this book. It's not a long book, but it's a book that's entirely derived from the Quran, which is why I really like it. And it was written by Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi, who was a scholar from Granada. He was one of the great ulama of Andalusia. What he's most known for is a book called Tasawwuf li Ulum Tanzil, facilitating the sciences of the Quran. It's a 4-volume tafsir that he wrote. He also has books in usul, and in the Maliki school, he's one of 3 that they say was given the gift of ikhtisar. He was an incredible, he just got to the root of things, and he gave you the zubda, just the cream of whatever he was writing about. He was born in 693, which in the Christian era is 1294. And he lived in Andalusia at a time that was quite difficult. He actually died a shaheed. He was in a battle defending the Muslim lands from Christian incursion. He's one of the great geniuses of Islam, but he was also what you feel from reading his text. I mean, because I've spent a lot of time reading him, and his tafsir is probably the one that I've looked in more than any other. It's not long, but it's always amazes me that he has things in there that you don't find in the longer tafsir. You always sense this kind of spiritual rootedness in his thought, and his ihsan is really the center of his view of the sciences. So he wrote this book. He says that there's 12 essential stations in the science of Tasawwuf. And he actually believed that Tasawwuf was one of the sciences that was necessary before you could actually interpret the Quran, that you had to have some mastery of it. And I want to say that from my own reading, anybody that rejects that science is just, all they're doing is displaying their ignorance of the religion. Because I've never seen any scholar, whether it was Ibn Taymiyyah, even Ibn Abdul Wahhab, who's the founder of the movement in Najd that spread over the Arabian Peninsula. Even Ibn Abdul Wahhab has letters saying that he never denied Tasawwuf, that it's a science of Islam. Nobody has ever. Ibn Taymiyyah has an entire volume in his Fatawa on Tasawwuf. And where they differ is what's acceptable within the science. That's where they differ. And this is like medicine. You have medicine. You can't deny that Chinese medicine is a type of medicine. It's a type of medicine. Some Western doctors don't accept certain practices within Chinese medicine. And Chinese doctors likewise don't accept certain things in Western medicine. But it's medicine, and it has a system, and much of it is empirical. So where this science comes from, there's 2 central aspects of the science. The first one is akhlaq, and it's getting your character aligned with the character of the Prophet ﷺ. That's at the center of this teaching. It's trying to align your character with the character of the Prophet ﷺ so that you actually follow his sunnah. I mean, one of the things that a lot of people do, they follow the sunnah of the beard, the siwak, the robe. They take all these outward sunnah, but then they don't follow the sunnah of smiling. Like they'll never smile. Now, the beard is an important sunnah, there's no doubt about that. But anybody can grow a beard. Do you know, it's an effortless practice. You just don't shave. Seriously, it's effortless. But smiling, when you don't feel like smiling, that it takes effort to do that. And that's why it's one of his amazing sunnahs, is that he was constantly smiling. Al-Dahhak, that's one of his names, the one who smiled. And he always smiled when he saw people, he greeted them with a smile. So that's one aspect. Now, the other aspect of the science is when you begin to inculcate prophetic qualities and practices, especially when you begin to do the devotional ones, because the Prophet كان يذكر الله في كل أحيانه, he used to mention Allah, like Aisha says in Sahih al-Bukhari. He remembered Allah in all of his states. So he did constant dhikr of Allah. If you begin to do those types of practices, certain things begin to happen. And that is what they call the ahwal, states. And states are real. People go into states. Now, there are different types of states. There are psychotic states. There are people that go into spiritual psychoses, where they do a lot of dhikr and they literally lose it. And I've seen this personally. I know that it's real. And you find it in other religions as well, where people, and I've seen people, I knew somebody who did dhikr all the time, and I used, and it wasn't healthy. And they ended up thinking that they were a prophet. That happens to people. It's a type of spiritual psychosis. So you have to have balance. It's very important to have balance. And that's part of the Prophet ﷺ's teaching, is teaching people balance, how to maintain balance in your life. Like he said that one of the Sahaba, he was doing dhikr all the time and fasting. He never spent any time with his wife. His wife went and complained to the Prophet. And the Prophet ﷺ told him, he said, no, your wife has rights over you. He said, I spend time with my family. That's also sunnah, to be with your family. There's a sunnah for sitting and enjoying yourself with your family. They had a food fight recorded in our tradition inside the house. They were throwing food at each other, and the Prophet was watching it, and he was laughing. That's in the sunnah. That's a frivolous thing, but we know that recreation and frivolity is actually necessary for a healthy person. That if you don't do those things, you get sick. So it's not frivolous in that there is a purpose for it. Even frivolity has a purpose. What is problematic when that becomes your life? When that's all your life is a search for fun and frivolity and things like that. Now, it's a science in that it's replicable. The definition of true science is falsifiability, according to Karl Popper. And falsifiability means that if you can't falsify something, then it's not science. It's philosophy or metaphysics or something else. Falsifiability enables you to, if you say that the sound barrier is broken at a certain speed, and every time you get to that speed, you hear the sound barrier broken, you can falsify that theory. You can test it. So if it doesn't happen the same way every time, then it's obviously not, the theory's not sound. So, or freezing ice at 0 Celsius. Water freezes at 0 Celsius. If you keep testing that with calibrated instruments that are effective, and every single time it freezes at 0, you've falsified something, you've tested it, and shown that indeed you get the same replication of you can replicate that experiment. And the same is true for these inner sciences, is that people, when they do certain things, they get the same experiences. And that's why these books are very interesting, because they're books written in Sri Lanka, in Herat, in Turkey, in Morocco, by different scholars, and they're describing the same things, because the same things happen to people in different times and places. And in that way, it's replicable. So the ahwal, that's a separate science. That's a separate science. And that's really not, this is more about akhlaq and about behavior. So those are the two branches of this science, is the science of the states and stations, of the things that happen to people in those, and then trying to inculcate these qualities in oneself, which is what this book is about. So he's going to talk from the Quran about the maqam al-shukr, the station of gratitude and praise, al-shukr wal-hamd, the maqam of taqwa, the station of taqwa, and then there's degrees in that of taqwa and shukr. Maqam al-dhikr, the station of dhikr, maqam al-sabr, the station of patience, maqam al-tawheed, maqam al-mahabba, the station of love, maqam al-tawakkul, the station of trust, maqam al-muraqaba, which is the station of vigilance, of awareness of the divine presence. Maqam al-khawf, the station of fear, state of awe. Maqam al-raja, state of hope. Maqam al-tawbah. And then maqam al-ikhlas, which is really, that's at the root. Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, in his Qawa'id, he said there's over 2,000 definitions of tasawwuf. But he said all of them revolve around sidq at-tawajjuh, sincerity. That's really at the root of this. I want to really thank the people that have been helping, and I just want to say, all of you, the ladies only for this one, just give Aisha Subhani a really big hug and a kiss on her forehead, because she lost sleep trying to make sure that everybody was here and going through this, really, with her 2 kids, a husband, and she's also an emergency room doctor. And she really just volunteered to do this. And, may Allah reward her, really, because it's just incredible. And then As'ad and a lot of other people here. But, As'ad Tarsin also just been doing an incredible amount. They've been trying to get these visas for the people that didn't come. I hope all of you made dua for them to get their visas. But it's also, one of the things that, the Muslims, unfortunately, they blame the qadr for their own ineptitudes, which has always really bothered me. Whenever people are inept, they say, qadr Allah ma sha'a, Allah decreed it, which is not really fair to do that, to blame your, when you, not blame Allah, but when you put the responsibility on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's when you've done everything that you can do with the best in which you could do it. And then when it still doesn't happen, that's where you say qaddar Allah, masha. We did everything we could. But when people don't do anything and then they just qaddar Allah, masha, no, you have free will. We're not, that's a real problem with Muslims, is their misunderstanding of the qadar. And it's a major problem. It's one of the great criticisms of a lot of the Orientalists, of the Muslim world when they were studying the Muslim world in the 19th century, is this kind of fatalism that creeped into the Muslim world. And there really is a sickness. We have a real sickness about that, of just, like in Libya, they say Allah ghalib, which is true, but it's what Sayyidina Ali said when the Khawarij said, La hukma illa lillah. He said, Kalimatu haqqin urida biha al-batil. It's true, but it's being used for falsehood. So it's true, but it's being used for falsehood. So it's a real problem. But there's good people, we're very fortunate. There's some good people. May Allah increase them and give them tawfiq. I didn't arrange this, but when I delayed my flight hoping that the women would travel with me, but they didn't. But when I got on the plane, I was the last one on the plane. And then one person came after me, and it was the ambassador. So the Saudi ambassador to the U.S., we ended up on the same flight together. And, I told him how I felt about the whole thing, the way things went, and he was very conciliatory. And I think from his end, because there's 2 ambassadors in the U.S., which I did not know. He's ambassador in New York, and then there's an ambassador in Washington. And he just called me right before I came here, just to say that he's working on it and trying to get things. So there are people trying to help, and for whatever reasons there just was a miscommunication, breakdown, something, qadar Allah ma sha'an fa'al, I don't know what happened. But some people got here anyway. Even, so some people shouldn't have been here if it was going on the normal with all the other women, but they ended up getting here anyway. So qadar Allah ma sha'an fa'al, there's nothing we can do about that. I'm glad people who are here, and inshallah, I just want to say the people that are here with us, Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, really, he's one of the great treasures of this ummah. And it's not because he's my teacher he's recognized by some of the greatest scholars in the ummah as being at a level that is just very rare in our ummah. He would hold his own with scholars of the past. He's somebody that could sit in the circles of the scholars, really. And if you read his books, you'll know that, because he engages the previous usuli scholars as a peer. He's in that conversation, which is very unusual. Most ulama today they have naqal, they transmit whereas he has naqal and then he has aqal, he has tasarruf, so he has his own opinion. But he's really rare. He's a philosopher also. His thoughts quite rarefied. But it's just a real blessing to have him. And then Sheikh Abdullah al-Qadi, for people that don't know him, what a blessing, a treat. He's such a gift to have with us. And if you knew what he did behind the scenes to make sure that you really have a wonderful experience. And today I was just watching him getting permission to visit these places that most people can't visit without difficulty and things. It was an art form, because he's got the daha of the kind of savvy of his ancestor Ibn Aqil ibn Abi Talib, because he's a direct descendant of the Prophet's cousin. And Aqil was known for just his ability, just to his savvy and his diplomacy and intelligence, and then Walid also, and Ustad Walid and Ustad Yahya and the people that are here. And unfortunately, Imam Zayd, may Allah also make easy his journey, and Sheikh Jamal also. We really wanted them to be here. Imam Zayd, he's the indefatigable. He's the one that kind of holds it all together because he mashallah, may Allah reward him. But he, unfortunately, as some of you know, had lost his passport in New York. So we're waiting for him, inshallah, to come. But hopefully it'll be a very enriching, rewarding experience for all of us. And, the most important thing that I would say is just please, to have that adab, especially with the people that are over you, not over you in any other way than just the order, to maintain order. So please have that proper adab with people. I know there's some people here that are, they have positions of leadership in their own communities and things like that. And so it's just good to try to be with the group and maintain that, the order of this group, and respect especially the Aisha and Asad and anybody else who's, and Sidi Faraydun, Mujaddidi. I forget Faraydun because it's like me. I like Faraydun, he's just like, it's like me. So you always forget yourself. I did this thing one night, we had this night of gratitude, and I forgot the two closest people to me, and I told them later, they were like totally devastated. Like I said, it's like me. It didn't even occur to me because, but Sidi Faraydun, and it's really important to just to have that respect for them, and they have to respect you also. So that's a two-way street, but understand they're under a lot of stress and pressure. So if somebody does snap or something like that, just have a good opinion of people because they do. There's a lot of pressure, and it's an immense amount of responsibility. So, and then also, I hope did people go to the Masjid of Ibn Abbas yet? Oh, mashallah. Yeah, Ibn Abbas, radiyallahu anhu. He's the only person, because he was born during the drought, during the time when they had the sanctions on the Prophet ﷺ, so that they didn't have any dates. They were eating leaves of trees at the time. So when he was born, they brought him to They brought him to the Prophet ﷺ, and he didn't have anything to give the tahniq. So he gave them the tahniq is when you take dates and put it in the mouth of the child. You mix it with the spittle, put it in the mouth of the child. So he did it with his own spittle. And Mujahid, who was his student, he said, he is the only person that I know of that his tahniq was solely with the spittle of the Prophet ﷺ. And he made the Prophet very happy because it was a difficult time for the Prophet. So when he was born, because it was his uncle and his aunt's child, Al-Abbas and Fadl, Lubaba. And best position is that they were Muslims, even though Abbas hid his Islam for strategic reasons. But Ibn Abbas, he served the Prophet ﷺ. When the Prophet ﷺ died, he was probably 13. I mean, there's a riwayah that he was 10. But he soon, in his teens, became central to Sayyidina Umar's majlis. And a lot of the older people from Badr and things, initially that bothered them because he was very young. He's like 16 years old and he's in the majlis of Sayyidina Umar. And Sayyidina Umar used to test them and ask them questions, and they couldn't answer it. And then he would ask Ibn Abbas, and he would give the right answer. And he said, that's why he's here. So he is an amazing person. He fought at Constantinia, in Constantinople. He was there with Yazid's army when they went, with Ibn Umar and others, because the Prophet said that أول جيش يغزو قسطنطينية أو بلاد قيصر مغفور له. The army that first goes to Constantinople will be forgiven for their sins. And so he wanted to be in that. And he also fought in Tunisia. I mean, he's amazing that so he wasn't just a scholar, he was out there. He was in Egypt, he was in Iraq. He was an amazing man, really stunning. And he was very successful in the world. He became very wealthy. He dressed in very fine clothes. He was noted for his majlis. They said his majlis was a majlis that had poetry and fiqh and Arabic and tafsir, everything. And he was even though all the poets were there, he was the one that knew the most. In tafsir, he's the basis of tafsir, really. I mean, Ibn Abbas, the Prophet called him Tarjuman al-Quran. He was called Tarjuman al-Quran, the interpreter of the Quran. And it came from a dua that the Prophet ﷺ said, فَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ وَعَلِّمْهُ التَّأْوِيلِ. Give him knowledge of this religion and teach him how to interpret. So that's a dua the Prophet gave for him, and it was answered. He also lost his eyesight at the end of his life. He got cataracts, and they used to have a treatment for cataracts where they would actually scrape and then they didn't allow them they couldn't go into sajda for about 2 weeks, probably for just the pressure or something. He didn't want to do that because he said he couldn't go without making sajda for 2 weeks. It's just too difficult. Really stunning person. But this is where he died, and he's buried here, and very beloved to the Prophet ﷺ. His aunt is Maymuna, who the Prophet married outside of Mecca when he came to make the Umrah, because Maymuna was the sister of Lubaba, who's his mother. And so he used to be able to go in and out of the Prophet ﷺ's house, and he would spend time with his aunt. And so he lived with the Prophet intimately. And when the other kids used to play, they would tell him, come and play with us. And he would say, no, I want to get as much knowledge from these men because they're going to die, and then people will look to us. And they said, no, there's plenty of scholars. And the kids said that they realized later that Ibn Abbas, because everybody began to go to him for knowledge, even the older ones. So Allah gave him something from early on, and he's a really amazing man, and beloved of the Prophet ﷺ. Hibbuhu. صلى الله عليه وسلم. جزاكم الله خيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. اللهم صل عليه صلاة تنجينا بها من جميع الأهوال والآفات وتقضي لنا بها جميع الحاجات وتطهرنا بها من جميع السيئات وترفعنا بها عندك أعلى درجات وتبلغنا بها أقصى الغايات من جميع الخيرات في الحياة وبعد الممات وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.